This week, our story of the development of English furniture brings us here to Brighton, and this, its most familiar landmark, the Royal Pavilion, containing as it does one of the most magnificent and varied collections of Regency furniture anywhere in the world. The Prince Regent's summer palace by the sea, his oriental fantasy overlooking the English Channel, is in so many ways characteristic of the man, combining as it does absurdity and splendour. It's seen by some as the worst example of bad taste in the whole of the 19th century. But love it or hate it, one thing you can certainly never do is ignore it, either the building itself or what it contains. The Prince of Wales first visited Brighton in 1783, when it was just beginning to develop from a small fishing village into a fashionable watering place. He liked it so much that he built himself a house here, a Palladian villa designed by Henry Holland. It was finished in 1787, and for the next quarter of a century, the Prince spent a great deal of time, and far too much money, extending and redecorating it. Then he decided he'd rather rebuild it altogether. Well, he was very keen on the Oriental designs that were once again in fashion, and in 1815 he finally decided on an Indian pavilion with Islamic domes and minarets to be built by John Nash. It was completed in 1822. The core of Holland's original building was now the saloon, where the Prince had made his first comparatively restrained essays in Oriental decoration. But in the corridor, or the long gallery as it's sometimes called, he really let himself go, and the effect here is overwhelming. The combination of blazing lights and colours with the stifling heat from the patent stoves was often too much for his guests, and they sometimes succumbed to the heat before ever reaching the banqueting room at the other end. This is perhaps the most magnificent of all the state apartments, dominated by a vast domed ceiling, 45 feet high, and an immense gasolier weighing nearly a ton. A room in which the Prince Regent, noted for his gluttony, spent much of his time. In the evening, when dinner was over, the company was often entertained in the music room, sometimes by the host himself, who was an enthusiastic amateur musician and kept an 80-piece orchestra. Prinny, as he was nicknamed, was the most talented and versatile of all George III's 15 children, and in his youth he was enormously popular. He was a man of great vitality and charm, handsome in his florid Hanoverian way, kind-hearted and generous with his favourites. But the country couldn't forgive the vast debts he'd run up while England was at war, and long before the Regency was over, he'd ceased to be a public idol and was well on the way to becoming a public embarrassment. When he became king in 1820, he was already 59 years of age, and so overweight and dogged by ill health, he even had difficulty climbing the stairs. And so a new set of apartments were created for him here on the ground floor. They were a bedroom, a library, and this anteroom. Now, the Regency officially lasted from 1811, when he took over from his ailing father, George III, to 1820, when, as I've said, he became king. But when we talk about the Regency period in terms of English furniture, then we generally refer to the first 30 years of the 19th century. And during those years, there was no single dominating artistic influence. There were all sorts of styles that came to bear. Let's illustrate one or two of those. Now, this chiffonier commode, which sat in the king's anteroom, in black lacquer and marble top, obviously reflects his taste for the Oriental. As does this watchstand over here, made to represent a Chinese shrine, but it's the work of an English craftsman. It wasn't imported from China, and the watch would have hung very neatly just in the top here. And then over here on the mantelpiece behind me, a pair of mantel ornaments. This is one of them, very obviously French Empire. This mantel clock by Thomas Hope represents yet another stylistic influence brought to bear, and very common during the Regency period, Egyptian style. And again, these wall lights in the alcoves on either side of me, a Greco-Roman influence obviously at work there. And so in this one single room, all these different styles brought to bear. And they all come together in this room, I think you'll agree, in some harmony. And they demonstrate that, if not in the public staterooms, at least in his private apartments, the king preferred elegance to ostentation. And you'll find the same thing reflected in the library, where Arthur is now looking at the furniture.
And there were simple designs too, as well as all that. And many good designers made this sort of Regency furniture. Here's one by Thomas Hope. This appeared in a book he published in about 1807. You couldn't have anything much more simple than this. Gilt pineapple finials, nothing more. Simple straight arms, nice little leopard's head there. All painted to represent rosewood and raised on pretty simple baluster turn legs, just with a little bit of gilt fluting. So not always so flamboyant. And here's a rather simple sort of a couch, double scroll end, has this Egyptian motif here of a lotus flower, 4 feet, and for the first time, quite a little restricted panel of inlaid brass. Now, Regency furniture usually had a profusion of inlaid brass with brass mouldings, all sorts, like this, for example. Look at that pillar. Just look at that pillar, that triangular-shaped pillar with a flat base, all brass mouldings, brass scroll feet, very poussé with acanthus. That's Regency. And a beautiful top. Just look at this top. Picked rosewood, lovely curls there, wide band of inlaid brass on ebony running all round, cross-grain with coral mandel. That's what you call a snorter. It's a lovely table. And here, perhaps, you recognise this. Most people would. A mahogany armchair. You noticed last week now you saw library steps disappear into tables. This week you're going to see library steps born out of a chair because this is a Regency library steps chair. See the reintroduction of cane? Comes back. And here you see, you just turn the back over and you have very, very strong library steps. Here is a chair which one associates now with Regency as we sort of know it. Grotesque sort of massive figures, big pair of sphinxes there, carved wing sphinx for those supports, and a nice wrought iron curly tail with a little gilt finial on the end and with animals' legs carved at the back with hoof feet. But that's the sort of features you see. And here is another chair. This one, a set of 10 here in the pavilion. And this appeared in a book published by George Smith about 1807. Here now you've got everything. The head of Medusa there, black and gold. This gilt decoration, these scrolls, the anthemion, honeysuckle. There it nearly always is on Regency stuff. More cane panels, cane back. This a good feature here. Invariably on plain friezes and anywhere around tables where there is going to be a star, it's either applied like this or is inlaid in brass. And there we go down, having passed these leopards' heads, down to leopards' feet, gilt paw feet down there. And these rather interest me because you see they're so designed that the animal seems to be going that way. His back legs, instead of splaying out to give plenty of support, my word, this chair is strong enough, they're shaped to go in that way, so you get the idea of the animal going along. And here's a bit more of George Smith. Lovely quality, just a mahogany open bookcase. That more or less describes it, apart from these columns. Look at this carving of that man's mask head. Beautifully carved head, going right down. Egyptian influence once more, right down. The feet show it. There they are, Egyptian feet. And this sort of table was very popular in the early part of the 19th century. Italian tables. People who went on the Grand Tour brought these back. Nice, this one quite nice, inlaid with semi-precious stones and a large armorial on the top. But that could be nearly anything. But when you look underneath there, now you see what it is, dolphins. 3 beautifully carved dolphins standing up, as it were, on their heads, holding up this marble top. Again, a flat triangular base and gilt scroll feet. But dolphins, there's a lot of dolphins in Brighton.
There are indeed, and most of them, it seems, are here in the Royal Pavilion. This is the South Drawing Room, and it really is like a furniture aquarium. There are dolphins decorating this and supporting that, dolphins all over the place. And when you look at this sofa, you may well say to yourself, Well, that really is too much. It's the flamboyance of the Regency period gone absolutely mad. Indeed, Pliny himself may well have thought so, because this dolphin furniture was not actually here in his day. It was donated later by a lady called appropriately Mrs. Fish. And the reason it's here is, however flamboyant, it's still regarded as among the finest furniture the Regency produced. More dolphins you see on this armchair. Why are they here? Why so many of them? Well, it's said that the dolphins reflect the euphoria felt in Britain at the time as a result of the great victories of Nelson and his captains. And that is also reflected in the centerpiece of this room, a magnificent torchère surmounted by a glass vase. And you see on this painted panel here, commemoration of Nelson's victory at Trafalgar. But that, of course, was only one of the Admiral's great engagements, and I've no doubt that these sphinxes reflect the victory at the Nile. And there on the front to the memory of Lord Viscount Nelson. And all this is really so typical of the Regency. Very fond they were of commemorating naval and military victories of one kind or another. And this military influence is seen on these chairs. First of all, with this cable twist, a tribute to the Navy, and here the cavalry sword reflected in that saber leg. And so to this sofa table and yet more dolphins, 4 of them, 1 on each corner, supporting that central column. And that's just one of several fine sofa tables in the Royal Pavilion.
Well, I'm sure you'll realise that several sofa tables have been brought into the corner of this room just for me to talk about sofa tables. They're all the same, bear in mind. They've all got 2 flaps and they've all got 2 drawers. So virtually all these 5 tables are the same in that respect. Flaps on the short sides, this side. Flaps when they're on the long side of tables become Pembroke tables. These are sofa tables. And here is a perfect example of a straightforward Regency table. You see the wide band of inlaid brass all round the top. You notice brass mouldings, always a plentiful supply of brass. Nice column down there, all the ornament there in brass, and of course quadruple supports with brass casters. No one could mistake that for anything but Regency. But of course there's some 30 years in the Regency period, and obviously designs change a bit. Here's another Regency table in rosewood again. They like rosewood. But you see 2 brass lines here, no smothered with brass, 2 brass lines and little brass flower heads inlaid at intervals all round. And because this table is later like that, you see the only difference in these is the columns. And there is, to my mind, quite an ugly column, a nasty, round, heavy central column there with these collars all round it and the nasty, heavy gadroons. No criticism of the period, but just a like or a dislike of my own, because that again is pure Regency. And here's another one. This table's just about into the 19th century, and only just about 1801 or 2 or 3, in mahogany, no brass, nice cross-grained border to the top, and 4 little turn columns there which make it rather pretty, and concave arrangement there with the quadruple legs and the brass claw casters. That, to my mind, is perhaps the most likeable one of the 3 at the moment we've seen. There's another Regency one here, you see, rosewood again, all picked curls, good top, but no columns now, all columns taken away in favour of what we call end standards. End standards come in all sorts of forms. In the 18th century, they were square and straight, but in the 19th century, they become lyre-shaped, just like that. The legs come up with a little bump over the top, and that makes that, again, Regency. And this is the true purpose of a sofa table. It doesn't just happen, but they fitted as this against this sofa. Here would sit the person with little things that he or she might want in these drawers, and there they were. They're shams on the one side and drawers on the other. And the last table of all, of course, is what you might say absolutely pure Regency. Every sort of thing inlaid with brass. wide brass border all the way around, inlaid with brass, everywhere on that column, every single where, even on the brackets, you see, that support the top. Look at that. When you bring out that bracket, smothered in brass. Anthemion, honeysuckle, everything that one could associate with Regency, and of course, lovely coromandel. Nice wood coromandel, just like ebony, hard as a brick, and really a very attractive wood. So, a very good sofa table.
Almost everywhere you go in this extraordinary building, you're confronted with Eastern and Oriental influences of one kind or another. Outside, we're in the world of Islam. Here, we're in a Chinese world. Just look at this magnificent bamboo staircase, or so it appears at first glance. But look a little more closely. This bamboo is in fact cast iron, and you see in their attempt at simulation, they've even gone so far as to paint in these knotholes here. And this stair rail is not bamboo. Again, it's mahogany. And so into the corridor, really looking a bit like a Peking palace. Very much the same today as it was in George IV's time, and nothing could reflect more accurately his taste for the Chinese influence. This is one of 3 small armchairs that were imported from China around about 1800. But the real bamboo furniture in this room is actually in the minority. This is made by an English craftsman. It's actually satinwood on that pier table. No king since the time of Charles II had had a more profound influence on the craftsmen of his period than did George IV. And wherever you go, whether it's in the grand state rooms or the small private apartments, you find all over the place pieces of furniture that remain today as a testament to the magnificent skill of those early 19th century craftsmen.
Many of these things are so unusual that perhaps you could feel you could not live with them. But we brought now a few things together that I myself like very much and feel that anybody could live with these. Anybody could live with this chair. There are 4 here. They just interest me because they happen to have been designed by Henry Holland, and you will remember he was the fellow who first designed the first house here. But there can't be anything much more simple than this. Nice reeded arms, padded, pretty, a little bit of shape, square frame, standing on front, turned, tapering legs, fluted. Not much else, but do you remember now the chairs we spoke about made by George Smith? Those that had the leopard's head arms and all the pad feet going the same way. This is the sort of leg that one usually expects to find on a biggish sort of chair, a leg splaying out backwards. And that's why I said those were so unusual, because they all seem to go that way. This is pretty, look. Just a nice little, just a little feature in the upholstery there. Reminds me so of a very nice draped pelmet for some nice silk curtains. Just pretty. Now for the little bits of Regency furniture that everyone will recognise as Regency. This, by its brass panel here, a little adjustable music chair, and nothing much else to say about it except that it's just very pleasant and would stand very easily by any piano, no matter whether it was a modern one or an old one. Little modern bit of needlework on there that perhaps helps it along a bit. But this is the thing I like. Now, I do like this because I love quality, and this just oozes quality. There is the top. You see little engraved brass spandrels, a nice oval inlaid brass centre there, and little pearls along here, just cut, just carved, and brass ovalo mouldings, solid brass mouldings. And underneath, our old friend, the lyre's back with us. Lovely lyre-shaped supports there, and more brass down below, much more. This is all solid brass, and brass inlaid down the quadruple legs with the usual little brass claw casters. Now that's pretty, and it's nice when you open it, because it is a teapoy. Has 4 little caddy boxes, and misses, because I suppose they've been broken, the 2 cut glass mixing bowls. Let's have a look at these little boxes. Now, there they are, made out of eighth-inch wood, little tiny little dovetails holding them together, and a lid which fits nicely. And there is one made, and it goes in that hole there and just falls down like that. Here's another one here, just the same, less than 1/8 of an inch wood, a lid that fits well in mahogany. There's where it came from. No matter where you put them, this is the quality. No matter where you put them, they go in. Look at this. That one goes in the wrong one and slides down. That one goes in the wrong ones and slides down and puffs air out. Now then, that's why these things are still about. They're not about by accident. This has been used. The 2 glass bowls have been broken and gone. This is just here because of its quality and the care that a cabinet maker exercised in making that bit of furniture. That's why antiques are about, the quality and the manner in which they went to endless trouble to make, what, a little work table like that. See? Lyre-shaped standards there again, the little quadruple supports, and, of course, a pretty little work table. Can't you see years ago the little ivory spools there, each holding coloured silks? And here's the way you get into the needlework bag. When you've finished, you put the unfinished work down there and close the thing up, and just a pretty little table. Nice writing table there, again in rosewood. You remember the sofa table? I didn't like that nasty round column, because there's a prettier column, a nice round support there from which spring those 4 quadruple legs there, and very pretty acanthus leaf casters. Now, what about people who collect little miniature bits? What about this little cylinder top table? Little cylinder top desk like that, 3 little drawers underneath and a cylinder front. Lovely pilasters here with the gilt capitals and eagle claw feet. Of course, it's not a writing desk at this size, but look what they've done. Now, isn't that pretty? 6 engraved glass decanters, liqueur decanters, and 2 liqueur glasses, so cleverly arranged that you can shut it down with no fear of breaking anything. The glasses just slide into 2 little holes there, and there's the thing. Now then, people who collect miniature bits, isn't that sweet? And it usually ends up, these programs, as you now know, with something I particularly like. I don't know that perhaps that would look well in a flat in which I live, but nevertheless, I shan't forget these tools. Huge scallop shell, just look at that. Beautifully carved, and what's it do? Well, of course, it rests, look, on a great big, fat, juicy dolphin, sort of holding all that up, just like that. And here in the pavilion, there are just 4 of those, and I really think they are delightful.
George IV died in June 1830, and his Brighton pavilion is in so many ways a fitting memorial to the man the Duke of Wellington once described as the most extraordinary compound of talent, wit, buffoonery, obstinacy, and good feeling I ever saw in my life. And his pavilion is also a memorial to a whole era, because by the time it was completed, the robust exuberance of Georgian England was already giving way to the more sober virtues of the Victorians. Well, next week in our programme, we'll be looking at some of the furniture of the Victorian era. And until then, from Arthur Negus and me, goodbye.
Extraordinary, surprising stories behind everyday objects in the curious history of your home. Listen on BBC Sounds.